Nicolas Maduro, a Venezuelan leader who won the special election held in April 2013 to choose a replacement to serve out the remainder of the term of Venezuelan Pres. Hugo Chavez, who had died in March. After serving as vice president, October 2012 to March 2013, Maduro, a former labor leader, became the interim president following Chavez's death. A zealous proponent of Chavismo, the political system and ideology established by Chavez, Maduro was the successful candidate of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, PSUV, in the special election to replace Chavez, and he was re-elected in 2018. Maduro's increasingly authoritarian rule led to repeated attempts by the opposition to remove him from office. On January 3, 2026, Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were captured by United States forces. Maduro faces charges of narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices against the U.S. In announcing Maduro's capture, Trump said that the United States would run Venezuela until a safe, judicious, and proper transition to new leadership can take place. On the morning of January 3, 2026, after months of build-up, the United States launched a large-scale military operation in Venezuela that resulted in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. Maduro and his wife were flown out of the country, and Maduro has been indicted by the U.S. on charges of narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices against the U.S. The operation follows months of military buildup from the U.S. in the region, with President Donald Trump accusing Maduro of supporting drug traffickers, accusations Maduro has vehemently denied. Trump said the U.S. would run the country following Maduro's capture, with particular attention to having U.S. oil companies take over Venezuela's struggling nationalized oil industry. On January 3, 2026, Maduro was captured by United States forces in a large-scale attack on Venezuela. He and his wife, Cilia Flores, were swiftly flown out of the country, and Maduro will face charges of narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices against the U.S. in the Southern District of New York. The operation marked months of buildup by U.S. forces in the region, as President Donald Trump had accused Maduro of supporting drug traffickers, accusations that Maduro has vehemently denied. Trump said the U.S. would run the country following Maduro's capture, with particular attention to having U.S. oil companies take over Venezuela's struggling nationalized oil industry. Nicolas Maduro became interim president following Hugo Chavez's death in March 2013 and won the special election in April 2013 to serve out the remainder of Chavez's term. Maduro faced an economic crisis, opposition attempts to remove him, international condemnation, and allegations of electoral fraud. He also dealt with a faltering economy, high inflation, and shortages of basic goods. Nicolas Maduro Moros, born November 23, 1962, is a Venezuelan politician and former union leader who served as the President of Venezuela from 2013 until his de facto removal of power by the United States in 2026 following his capture and extraction from the country. He served as the Vice President of Venezuela under President Hugo Chavez from 2012 to 2013, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2012. Initially a bus driver, Maduro rose to become a trade union leader before being elected to the National Assembly in 2000. A member of the United Socialist Party, PSUV, he was appointed to a number of positions under Chavez, serving as President of the National Assembly, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Vice President under Chavez. Maduro assumed the presidency after Chavez's death and won the 2013 special presidential election. He ruled Venezuela by decree after 2015 through powers granted to him by the ruling party legislature. Shortages in Venezuela and a drop in living standards led to a wave of protests in 2014 that escalated into daily marches nationwide, repression of dissent and a decline in Maduro's popularity. An opposition-led National Assembly was elected in 2015 and a movement toward recalling Maduro began in 2016, which was ultimately cancelled by Maduro's government. Maduro maintained power through the Supreme Tribunal, the National Electoral Council, CNE, and the military. The Supreme Tribunal stripped the elected National Assembly of power and authority, resulting in a constitutional crisis and another wave of protests in 2017. In response to the protests, Maduro called for a rewrite of the constitution, and the Constituent Assembly of Venezuela was elected in 2017 under voting conditions that many concluded were irregular. In 2018, Maduro was re-elected and sworn in a process dismissed as illegitimate by the United States and European Union. The President of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, was declared interim president by the opposition legislative body, starting a presidential crisis that spanned nearly 4 years and divided the international community. In 2024, Maduro ran for a third term in an election which the Maduro-aligned CNE claimed he won without providing evidence, starting another political crisis. Vote tallies gathered by the opposition showed that their candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, had won the most votes. In November 2025, Maduro was designated as a member of a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. Maduro was widely considered head of an authoritarian government characterized by electoral fraud, human rights abuses, corruption, and severe economic hardship. Between 2013 and 2023, Venezuela dropped 42 places in the Press Freedom Index. According to estimates by the United Nations, UN, and Human Rights Watch, under Maduro's administration thousands of people have died in extrajudicial killings and 7 million Venezuelans were forced to flee the country. The UN fact-finding mission on Venezuela concluded that the country's justice system independence had declined. The mission also identified frequent due process violations, including political external interference, and the admission of evidence through torture was alleged. Most Venezuelan television channels are controlled by the state, and information unfavorable to the government is not covered completely. In 2018, a board designated by the Organization of American States, OAS, alleged that crimes against humanity have been committed in Venezuela during Maduro's presidency. In 2021, the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, ICC, announced the opening of an investigation regarding the situation in the country. Maduro denies all allegations of misconduct and argues the United States has conspired against Venezuela to manufacture a crisis as a means of regime change. On January 3, 2026, Maduro and his wife were captured by U.S. forces. They were then transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, where they remain incarcerated, with Maduro expected to be arraigned in a Manhattan court in the next week. Nicolas Maduro Moros was born on November 23, 1962 in Caracas, into a working-class family. His father, Nicolas Maduro Garcia, was a prominent trade union leader and a militant dreamer of the Movimiento Electoral del Pueblo, MEP, and died in a motor vehicle accident on April 22, 1989. His mother, Teresa de Jesus Moros, was born in Cúcuta, a Colombian border town at the boundary with Venezuela. Maduro was raised in Calle 14, a street in Los Jardines, El Valle, a working-class neighborhood on the western outskirts of Caracas. The only male of 4 siblings, he had 3 sisters, Maria Teresa, Josefina, and Anita. Maduro was raised Catholic. In 2012, it was reported by the New York Times that he was a follower of Indian Hindu guru Satya Sai Baba and previously visited the guru in India in 2005. In a 2013 interview, Maduro stated that his grandparents were Jewish, from a Sephardic Moorish background, and converted to Catholicism in Venezuela. Maduro has been married twice. His first marriage was to Adriana Guerra Angulo, with whom he had his only son, Nicolas Maduro Guerra, also known as Nicolasido, who was appointed to several senior government posts, chief of the presidency's special inspectors body, head of the National Film School, and is a deputy to the National Assembly of Venezuela. In July 2013, he married Cilia Flores, a lawyer and politician who replaced Maduro as President of the National Assembly in August 2006, when he resigned to become Minister of Foreign Affairs, becoming the first woman to serve as President of the National Assembly. The two had been in a romantic relationship since the 1990s when Flores was Hugo Chávez's lawyer following the 1992 Venezuelan coup d'état attempts and were married months after Maduro became president. While they have no children together, Maduro has 3 stepchildren from his wife's first marriage to Walter Ramon Gavidia, Walter Jacob, Yuswal, and Yasser. Maduro is a fan of John Lennon's music and his political activism for peace and against war. Maduro has said that he was inspired by the music and counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, mentioning Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin. Maduro attended a public high school, the Liceo José Avalos, in El Valle. His introduction to politics was when he became a member of his high school's student union. According to school records, Maduro did not graduate from high school. Maduro worked as a bus driver for many years for the Caracas Metro Company. He founded an unofficial trade union at the company, which had banned unions at that time. He was also employed as a bodyguard for José Vicente Rangel during Rangel's unsuccessful 1983 presidential campaign. At the age of 24, Maduro was living in Havana after being sent by the Socialist League to attend a one-year course at the Escuela Nacional de Cuadros Julio Antonio Mella, a political training center directed by the Union of Young Communists. According to Carlos Peñalosa Zambrano, during Maduro's time in Cuba he was instructed by Pedro Mayret Prieto, a senior member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of Cuba who was close to Fidel Castro. According to Carlos Peñalosa Zambrano, Maduro was allegedly tasked by the Castro government to serve as a mole working for the Cuba's de Russian de Inteligencia to approach Hugo Chávez, who was experiencing a burgeoning military career. In the early 1990s, he joined MBR 200 and campaigned for the release of Chávez when he was jailed for his role in the 1992 Venezuelan coup d'état attempts. In the late 1990s, Maduro was instrumental in founding the movement of the Fifth Republic, which supported Chávez in his run for president in 1998. Maduro was elected on the MVR ticket to the Venezuelan Chamber of Deputies in 1998, to the National Constituent Assembly in 1999, and finally to the National Assembly in 2000, at all times representing the Capital District. He was elected as President of the National Assembly of Venezuela, a role he held from 2005 until 2006. Maduro was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2006, and served under Chávez in that position until being appointed Vice President of Venezuela in October 2012, after the presidential elections. According to BBC Mundo, during Maduro's tenure as foreign minister, he was considered a key player in pushing the foreign policy of his country beyond Latin American borders to approach almost any government that rivaled the United States. Venezuela's foreign policy stances during his term included ending relations with Taiwan in favor of the People's Republic of China, support for Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, breaking off diplomatic ties with Israel during the 2008-09 Gaza War, recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with the State of Palestine, a turnaround in relations with Colombia in 2008 and again in 2010, recognizing Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states, and support for Bashar al-Assad during the Syrian civil war. Tamir Porras, a 2019 visiting professor at Paris Institute of Political Studies who was Maduro's chief of staff during his tenure as foreign minister, said that in the early days of Chavismo, Maduro was considered pragmatic and a very skilled politician who was good at negotiating and bargaining. According to Rory Carroll, Maduro did not speak any foreign languages while serving as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In New York City in September 2006, while attempting to travel back to Venezuela via Miami, Maduro was briefly detained by United States Department of Homeland Security officers at the John F. Kennedy International Airport for around 90 minutes, after paying for 3 airline tickets in cash. Both Maduro and President Hugo Chávez were in New York City attending the 61st session of the UN General Assembly, where President Chavez called U.S. President George W. Bush the devil during his speech. The incident began when Maduro tried to pick up an item that had been screened at a security checkpoint at the airport, and security personnel told Maduro that he was prohibited from doing so. Maduro later identified himself as a diplomat from the Venezuelan government, but officials still escorted him to a room to conduct secondary screening. At one point, authorities ordered Maduro and other Venezuelan officials to spread their arms and legs and be frisked, but Maduro and others forcefully refused. His diplomatic passport and ticket were retained for a time but eventually returned. Speaking at the Venezuelan mission to the UN after his release, Maduro said his detention by the U.S. authorities was illegal and he filed a complaint at the United Nations. U.S. and UN officials called the incident regrettable but said Maduro had been identified for secondary screening. Homeland Security spokesman Russ Nock claimed that Maduro was not mistreated, saying that there was no evidence of abnormalities during the screening process. Maduro said the incident prevented him from traveling home on the same day. When he was informed of the incident, President Chavez said Maduro's detention was retaliation for his own speech at the UN General Assembly and stated that the authorities detained Maduro over his links to the Venezuelan failed coup in 1992, a charge that President Chavez denied. Prior to his appointment to the vice presidency, Maduro had been chosen by Chavez in 2011 to succeed him in the presidency if he were to die from cancer. This choice was made due to Maduro's loyalty to Chavez and because of his good relations with other Chavistas such as Elias Jaya, former Minister Jesse Chacon and Jorge Rodriguez. Bolivarian officials predicted that following Chavez's death, Maduro would have political difficulties and that Venezuela would experience instability. On October 13, 2012, Chavez appointed Maduro Vice President of Venezuela, shortly after Chavez's victory in that month's presidential election. On December 8, 2012, Chavez announced that his recurring cancer had returned and that he would be returning to Cuba for emergency surgery and further medical treatment. Chavez said that, should his condition worsen and a new presidential election be called to replace him, Venezuelans should vote for Maduro to succeed him. This was the first time that Chavez named a potential successor to his movement, as well as the first time he publicly acknowledged the possibility of his death. Chavez's endorsement of Maduro sidelined Diosdado Cabello, a former vice president and powerful Socialist Party official with ties to the armed forces, who had been widely considered a top candidate to be Chavez's successor. After Maduro was endorsed by Chavez, Cabello immediately pledged loyalty to both men. Interim President. My firm opinion, as clear as the full moon, irrevocable, absolute, total, is, that you elect Nicolas Maduro as president. I ask this of you from my heart. He is one of the young leaders with the greatest ability to continue, if I cannot. Hugo Chavez during a nationwide TV address, Cadena Nacional, December 8, 2012. Upon the death of Hugo Chavez on March 5, 2013, Maduro assumed the powers and responsibilities of the president. He appointed Jorge Araiza to take his place as vice president. Since Chavez died within the first 4 years of his term, the Constitution of Venezuela stated that a presidential election had to be held within 30 days of his death. Maduro was unanimously chosen as the Socialist Party's candidate in the election. When he assumed temporary power, opposition leaders argued that Maduro violated Articles 229, 231, and 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution, by assuming power over the President of the National Assembly. Worked as a bus driver for Caracas Metro and belonged to the Transit Union. Maduro campaigned for Hugo Chávez's release from prison for the 1992 attempted coup to overthrow President Carlos Andrés Pérez. After Chávez's release, Maduro helped him found the political party Fifth Republic Movement. Timeline: 1999, Maduro is elected to the National Constituent Assembly, the body convened to draft a new constitution. 2000, is elected to the National Assembly, the country's legislative branch of government. 2005 to 2006, serves as Speaker of the National Assembly. 2006 to 2013, serves as Foreign Minister. October 12, 2012, is selected by Chavez to serve as Vice President. December 9, 2012, facing his fourth surgery for cancer, Chavez endorses Maduro to succeed him. March 8, 2013, is sworn in as interim president following the death of Chavez. April 14, 2013, wins the presidential election by fewer than 2 percentage points. Maduro's opponent, Enrique Capriles Radonsky, demands a recount. On April 17, a manual recount is ruled as unconstitutional by the country's Chief Justice. April 19, 2013, Maduro is sworn in. September 30, 2013, Maduro announces on state-run TV that he is expelling 3 U.S. diplomats. He claims they were involved in a widespread power outage earlier in the month. "Get out of Venezuela," he says, listing several names. "Yankee, go home. Enough abuses already." February 12, 2014, ongoing student protests attract global attention when 3 people are killed. Major social and economic problems have fueled the protests, with some blaming the government for those problems. February 20, 2014, Venezuela revokes press credentials for CNN journalists in the country and denies them for other CNN journalists entering the country, following Maduro's announcement that he would expel CNN if it did not rectify its coverage of anti-government protests, calling it war propaganda. On February 22, Venezuela reissues press credentials for CNN journalists in the country. February 21, 2014, Maduro calls for U.S. President Barack Obama to accept the challenge of holding direct talks with Venezuela. January 15, 2016, following the release of years of economic data, Maduro declares a state of economic emergency. May 13, 2016, Maduro declares a constitutional state of emergency, which expands on the economic emergency he declared in January. October 30, 2016, Maduro participates in talks with political opponents for the first time in 2 years. May 1, 2017, Maduro announces that he has signed an executive order paving the way for changes in the constitution that will reshape the legislature and redefine his executive powers. July 30, 2017, an election is held to replace the National Assembly with a new pro-Maduro legislative body called the National Constituent Assembly. Amid clashes between police and protesters, at least 6 people are killed. Although Maduro claims victory, opposition leaders say the vote is fraudulent. July 31, 2017, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctions Maduro's assets and bars U.S. citizens from dealing with him. This comes a day after elections are held for a new lawmaking body. January 24, 2018, announces he will run for re-election. May 20, 2018, during an election denounced by opposition leaders and the international community, Maduro wins another 6-year term. Voter turnout falls to 46%, down from an 80% participation rate in 2013. The next day, an alliance of 14 Latin American nations and Canada, known as the Lima Group, releases a statement calling the vote illegitimate. August 4, 2018, several drones armed with explosives fly towards Maduro in an apparent assassination attempt during a military parade. The next day, the Interior Minister announces that 6 people have been arrested in connection with the attack. Maduro is not injured. September 8, 2018, the New York Times reports secret meetings between U.S. officials and Venezuelan military officers planning a coup against Maduro. CNN confirms the report, which describes a series of meetings over the course of a year. September 17, 2018, Maduro is criticized for eating a lavish meal by celebrity chef Nusret Gaki, also known as Salt Bae, in the midst of a food crisis. September 25, 2018, the United States imposes sanctions on Maduro's wife and 3 other members of his inner circle, as an attempt to weaken his grip on power. September 26, 2018, Maduro speaks at the UN General Assembly, calling the humanitarian crisis in his country a fabrication. He accuses the United States and its Latin American allies of trying to put their hands in our country. October 8, 2018, one of the suspects in the apparent assassination attempt dies in a fall from the 10th floor of a building. Intelligence officials say the death was a suicide. January 10, 2019, Maduro is sworn in for his second term, although most democratic countries in the region refuse to recognize him as president. The Organization of American States says its member nations voted 19-6, with 8 abstentions, to not recognize the legitimacy of Maduro's government. January 23, 2019, Juan Guaidó, who leads the National Assembly, declares himself the interim president amid anti-government protests. Following Guaidó's announcement, U.S. President Donald Trump says that the United States recognizes him as the legitimate president. Maduro accuses the United States of backing an attempted coup and gives U.S. diplomats 72 hours to leave the country. April 30, 2019, during a live televised address, Maduro claims troops loyal to him defeated a coup d'état attempt by Trump and National Security Advisor John Bolton. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tells CNN that Maduro had been preparing to depart the country via airplane, but Russians convinced him to stay. A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry says Pompeo's claim is false. July 4, 2019, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights publishes a report highly critical of the Maduro regime. Based on research conducted January 2018 to May 2019, the report highlights patterns of violations directly and indirectly affecting all human rights. Responding a few days later, Maduro says the report contains manipulations and inaccurate data. March 26, 2020, the Justice Department announces narco-terrorism and other criminal charges against Maduro and senior leaders from his government. Federal prosecutors in New York's Southern District, Miami, and Washington, D.C., allege the officials are the leaders of the so-called Cartel de los Soles and coordinate with the Colombian rebel group FARC to traffic cocaine to the United States. May 4, 2020, in a live address on state television, Maduro reports that 2 American mercenaries have been apprehended after a failed coup attempt to capture and remove him. He identifies the captured Americans as Luke Denman, 34, and Aaron Berry, 41. He shows what he claims are the U.S. passports and driver's licenses of the men, along with their ID cards from Silver Corp, a Florida-based security services company. On August 8, the men are sentenced to 20 years in prison. On December 20, 2023, it is announced that the U.S. has reached an agreement to secure the release of 10 Americans, including Berry and Denman. July 24, 2021, during an interview with Venezuela's state-run television, Maduro says he is ready to open negotiations with the Venezuelan opposition in August. October 16, 2021, Venezuela suspends ongoing negotiations with the opposition following the Cape Verde extradition of Colombian businessman Alex Saab, alleged financier to Maduro, to the United States on money laundering charges. September 20, 2022, a new UN report documents the crimes against humanity, including acts of torture committed by the Venezuelan security forces. The report says the orders for the crimes came from Maduro and other high-level officials. July 29, 2024, protests break out in several Venezuelan cities after Maduro is formally declared a winner by the county's electoral authority in a presidential race marred by accusations of electoral fraud. September 2024, the U.S. seizes Maduro's airplane in the Dominican Republic after determining that its acquisition was in violation of U.S. sanctions, among other criminal issues. The U.S. flew the aircraft to Florida on September 2, according to 2 U.S. officials. A second plane linked to Maduro is being investigated in the Dominican Republic, a source with knowledge of the situation told CNN. January 10, 2025, Maduro is sworn in for a third presidential term despite the protests of Venezuela's opposition movement, capping more than 5 months of dispute over the contested election. January 31, 2025, Trump announces that 6 Americans who had been detained in Venezuela are heading home to the U.S., after his envoy met with Maduro. February 6, 2025, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio formally seizes a second plane belonging to Maduro's government on behalf of the United States. September 2025, the U.S. military begins striking Venezuelan boats in international waters as Trump says the boats are carrying narcotics to the U.S. Maduro denies being involved in narco-trafficking. Maduro later says he is ready to declare a state of emergency to protect Venezuela, as well as claims Venezuela has 5,000 Russian-made anti-aircraft missiles in key air defense positions. November 24, 2025, the U.S. designates Maduro and his government allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization. November 30, 2025, in a letter to the Secretary General of OPEC, Maduro accuses the United States of making threats toward his country, in a move that he says seriously endangers the stability of Venezuelan oil production and the international market. Thank you for watching this video.